Empires in Iraq, Part 3. So I talked over an hour and got cut off there. So this is Part 3. I'm going to have to be faster if I want to finish this today. We're only page 8 of 41. So we were at, so I'll try to get less rants. This is why I haven't read these notes in 10 years or so. Because there's a lot of information here. There's also a lot of emotions. But talking it out is really helping a lot. Like I said when I started this, this is for me first, and then if anyone else can get any value from this. But this is really for me to put on record what I believe at this given time, November 2018, so I could go back. I find as I start to develop more of a refined opinion about things, and I want to be intellectually honest and sincere, it helps to put these ideas down. Journaling, podcasting, this is type of like an audio journal that I can go back later on, a year from now, 5 years from now, and see if I agree with those thoughts or if I need to revise them. This is all a way of looking in the mirror, which is, I think, what intellectually honest people should do. Is what do you believe? Put it down and then give it some time, live some more life, run your algorithms of morality and character against the world, and come back and see if you can defend those views or if you have to disown some of them. And what you find is that I tried this about in January, February, and you can't defend everything you say. I'm about a little bit over 50%. When I edit down stuff that I record, I try to edit down at least half. The same thing with the writing. And so I came up with this phrase this last year when I talked to people. I'm like, I'm just a little bit over 50% right. At our best, we can get 80, 90% if we're really on one. But as long as we're more than 50% right, I feel like we could correct towards the truth. If we're less than half right, then we should question some of our basic assumptions. But as long as we're more than 50% right, and we're being honest and sincere, we should be able to reflect and edit out the bullshit. So I invite correction always. With Latin America Civil War, that's where I went off. I was talking about what we did during the Reagan administration. Latin American Civil War, I see those patterns playing out here. There are death squads operating in Iraq. That's documented. That's why WikiLeaks, slow down, but that's why WikiLeaks is so important, because they provided the factual basis for a lot of the stuff that would have never seen the light of day otherwise. So we were paying death squads to operate in Iraq from the early inceptions of that war, probably to instigate a civil war. The colonel assigned to the CPA description of his office's work, pasting feathers together, hoping for a duck. A description of the colonel assigned to the CPA is they were pasting feathers together, hoping for a duck. CPA, can't produce anything. Think of a better acronym joke. Can't provide shit. That's not, I don't know. Shit doesn't start with an A. Bremer described as a loner. The colonel described his management as Iraq descended into guerrilla war as bizarre. So the colonel, again, the military has a lot less leniency for ineptitude as other bureaucracies. There is some like careerism, and when I was talking about my military history, that was probably a little bit of projection when I was talking about how I didn't like this guy or that guy. In the end, especially if you're in a battlefield, you gotta, if you are blatantly not self-aware and not effective, well, that's where like the fragging happened in Vietnam and other stuff. Is like you can only walk so far away from the truth when life and death is at risk. But these bureaucrats they put over there, that's where when I'm reading these histories, I trust the military perspective more than the bureaucrats' perspectives. So I always find it interesting when you find the military at odds with bureaucrats, because I think the military is going to see things a little bit more real, because they know that their life and the life of their soldiers is at stake. So this colonel was describing Bremer as bizarre. They don't see that his role is to, that's J. Paul Bremer. They don't see that his role is to ensure that the war. So the colonels might be a little bit naive that Bremer might have been there to make sure things are devolving into chaos. He might have been a fixer for the instability to continue. He did sow a lot of his decisions sowed the seed for the instability. So you could either claim that these guys are idiots or that they're failing like foxes, and failure is just the cover for the strategy. We don't understand his premise, which is different than what he states. Our values are not our words, but our actions, and America's values are revealed in the destruction she leaves. And I said something about pops and family. That's my own family issues at that time. I think my mom and dad were splitting up. They reconciled, but 10 years ago, I guess I'm projecting some of my harsh characterization of my dad's actions in the family at the time onto America, which is also how it seems like I use art to exercise my own emotions and figure stuff out. I'm in love with a girl who's addicted to drugs. I write poems about it. I feel angst about college or life situations, teachers I don't identify with. I write stories about it. I write songs about it. Now I'm writing a book about the angst I feel about the military because I feel strongly about injustice, and I feel this is a historic injustice going on. I'm turning it into a narrative, and I'm adding some personal family stuff into it too. His words are lofty like the U.S., but his wake is destruction, and he can't realize this. Have Fran, in the end conversation, tell him that his actions are who he is. He replies that he does not want to look like that guy, the pervert, the pedophile. I think my mom caught him once on like internet porn or something. Stuff that we've reconciled and he's owned up to. And you know, as I'm a man and I'm living longer in life, you start to give people a little bit more credit for having these like foibles. When we're younger and we have less life experience, we judge life really harshly. And maybe I still do in certain ways. I mean, I have to, because as you get older, if you think you get more wise, then you have to acknowledge that. Obviously, this incarnation of me is less mature and less wise than future incarnations. But I'm a little bit more lenient about the sex stuff, having, you know, relationships where I cheated too, or but back then I'm a lot more judgmental. I could just reflect on that. And Fran explains that it's not about appearance, that he is that guy. That type of thinking is what led him to this failure in character, the disconnect from objective truth, humanity. The person who values appearance over substance, whether purposeful or not, becomes the straw man, the shell of a person, selfish creature that has no place in a healthy family, society. Fran has this discussion until the very end. Pops thinks that he's a good guy. He's the man of ideals because he states them. He talks to his family, confesses to everyone, like a good Catholic, Mom says. He went to Catholic school when young. That's part of my pop's issues. He did go to San Juan Capistrano, which is an old mission in California. He went to Catholic school there. So once you start to learn more about your parents' family, and then my dad's brother passed away in April, and we both drove up to visit his mom, my grandma, and I learned a little bit more about the family backstories, and you learn about all these little formative things that happen in their life, and then you give them a little bit more credit. None of us have a perfect record, you know, and that's also this idea of morality and viewing the world that we just want to be correcting towards the truth, but you don't want to crucify people against the truth because you're not perfect. No one's perfect. So when I talk about bringing the war criminals to justice and other stuff, am I repeating that pattern? I just want an audit and the beginning of accountability, but I am definitely not one person to say this is the standard, and I'm not the enforcement of that standard. But if we don't start correcting towards the truth, I'm afraid these patterns are getting out of hand. He went to Catholic school, confesses to everyone, and holds it against his wife and children. They don't forgive him. The problem is revealed Monday. I don't know how much of this is autobiographical, how much of this is the narrative I was trying to construct the plotting. Mom's calls Wednesday, Thursday, tells Fran that he is telling everyone the kids won't forgive him, and the wife is throwing him out on his ass. Show the insular bubble he creates. Fran sets the record straight in and starts to make the point that he needs to work on his character. In the meantime, they need to disengage. And yes, they need to tell the police, even though he's the father, even though he's the head of the family, wording alludes to the head of the nation. This is not just your family, it's mine. Just like strength can be drawn from a good leader, your weakness of character, your innate selfishness, and rejection of basic human principles. In Pop's case, that you are an adult, kid is a minor, you're willing just to justify your lust with a child when, especially as a father, you should care for and protect children. Predators prey on the inexperienced, not fully developed, the weak. They are cowards, they are anathema to human spirit, which is at its most noble when it protects the weak, the vulnerable, when it does not see opportunities, whether lust, greed, or any other person, no vice. When it sees human beings, brothers, sisters, daughters, it allows us to raise each other upwards. Back and forth dialogue ends in grand mal. So my dad's epileptic. I think my mom caught him with some porn. Not underage. My dad's not that stupid, but it was like youngish. And on the internet, you can stumble across some weird shit. And then all of a sudden, you don't know, and you're jerking off to someone's shit in someone else's mouth. So yeah, I think that was a huge fight at that time. And my mom really dug into him because my dad was a teacher at one point. She's like, don't you see how this looks? You're like, this is like young women you're jerking off to, and you're a teacher. And I feel like we should be able to talk about everything as a family, definitely as a society. It could be embarrassing, but it could be growth too. That uncomfortable conversation is one that someone else maybe needed to have or needed to hear. Do right, fear no man. If you're really disgusted by the shit that you jerk off to, maybe you shouldn't be jerking off to it. Young women are attractive, but your initial impulse towards children should be protection. And I think that's pretty much what I'm talking about here, is that there's a difference between being attracted to like a lithe, young, attractive woman and something that like crosses that, like, it just makes you feel uncomfortable. What sexuality is weird, and there's no hard lines in the sand, but as a society, and I think basic morality is that we protect children. And I think when my mom caught on his phone or on his computer or whatever, it was like that zone of discomfort. But her being a really conservative Christian, she doesn't have tolerance for any pornography at all. And then him growing up Catholic doesn't have an honest or like as open a view of his sexuality as I have, or maybe like our current generation does. So it's hard to, it's a weird discussion to have. So this just shows that I was living in that house at the time and putting that drama going on. This is probably a discussion that happened that day that I was overhearing. Right into the story. Everything goes in the story. Just tuck it into the story and you make the artwork and everyone learns by it. Describe the CPA as the proconsul model. Have the lieutenant break this down. With his wisdom, his ability to command respect from his men, his fighting skills, the lieutenant wins the reader over. He describes the Roman proconsuls, wide authority ancient Romans gave to the governors of provinces. So lieutenant is well versed in classical history. A lot of good soldiers in the military, people who really love the military, really love the classics, and they love all that shit. I had this guy who I gave a tour to in Puerto Rico, who told me he had an old Spartan shield that was just the exact same replica of the shields that the Spartans wore. This guy was huge, 6'2", built like a brick shit house. He could like go up a coconut tree like nothing. I went swimming with him and I brought him some fins. He said he didn't need them, and he easily like was 50% faster than me with fins and him without fins. He could swim like a boat, and he was built like a boat. He was an insane individual. He said that he commanded troops. I think it was a sergeant in the Marines or something, or whatever you call him. But he said sometimes, like when they were doing runs with his teams, he would like at the end of runs just openly brawl with his soldiers. Like he would let a couple of them attack him at once, and he was just a beast of a man. I got some weed for his mom. He might remember me. Yeah, he said his mom, he was there with a family vacation, and his mom wanted some weed. I went and found it for him. We had some fun. Yeah, but he really liked military history. He liked the Spartans. and he would have fit right in back then. So I guess that's why I'm modeling the lieutenant on a little bit. Although that happened after this. Some military call the CPA slice of Baghdad as Oz. Yeah, because it's divorced from reality. Have soldiers call it that. Inside the green zone, the phone system uses a 914 area code from New York's Westchester County, where a phone system is based. Interesting, right? A lot of money in Westchester. Almost like being in a Walt Disney version of Arabian Nights. Lived in a villa that was originally owned by a Republican Guard colonel. Featured 6 bedrooms, hot tub on the balcony, 3 Iraqi maids. A lot of meals served in a high school cafeteria setting. A lot of their meals were served in a high school cafeteria setting, and they had pork. But yeah, in the green zone, it's a world apart. That's the largest embassy. At the time, it was the largest, I don't know if it still is, largest embassy in the world. It was the size of the Vatican City. People from the outside don't realize just how big of a foothold we still have in Iraq and what we built. We built Disneyland within the middle of Baghdad to house our State Department officials, and the CIA headquarters is in there. They have their own like little special command within the green zone. A bunch of stuff that we don't even talk about this stuff. It's just to add context about what we're doing in Iraq. Nighttime offered work, exercise. Nighttime offered the work, exercise, or drinking. Watch a lot of Fox News. 7 bar, which blows my mind because I'm watching Fox News with my parents since I've been here at their home. And it is interesting to say the least. I can't even unpack it right now, but it is interesting. 7 bars in the green zone, 1 for the contractors, 1 more exclusive operated by the CIA called Babylon. CIA operates a bar in the green zone. Largest is the disco at the Rashid Hotel. 400 intoxicated men and 3 women in the middle. Everyone was drunk and the mission was to hook up. To go outside the green zone, you needed 2 military vehicles, 4 armored guys. Go in and apply, get the name on the list for escort support. Often get superseded by higher priority projects. They had a fortress mentality. All they know of Iraq is what they see on TV, at Fox News, or heard in the mess hall. So the people are in a fortress, in a Disneyland, and all they see of what's outside those compound walls are the propaganda being created for political interest a half a world away. People running around with arms getting drunk, like the cantina from Star Wars. But we don't get those stories, do we? We get Matt Damon running around being noble. I'm trying to find, here we go. Next page. Have a soldier, a Dre, which me and my friends would call Dre, is this guy that we met when I was young, who claimed that he was in the Navy SEALs and he did that and we did this and that. And once you meet a person like that, at least my crew, we would just like label him. His name was Dre. And so every time we met someone who was like a bullshitter after that, we'd be like, oh, that's another Dre. So like when you meet a certain type of character, like we would just like be like, oh, that's another so-and-so. So like me and my friends, we like had Dre's. We're like, oh, that dude was a total Dre. Because we met one guy named Dre who was like that, like, my cousin wasn't like did this and that and I did this and that, and you just start talking to him like within 2-3 minutes. You're like, wait, you're like 20 and you're in like the Navy SEALs and the Green Beret, and you ran drugs for like cartels and blah blah blah. And we're just like, yeah, no, you don't know, like just trying to be like, they just dig themselves deeper and deeper holes. Anyways, fast talk. Trump is a Dre, definitely a fast talker. Talk about how he had a mission that took him into the green zone, and he hooked up with 2 Iraqi girls at once. He saved them from some problem. They were prostitutes or something, and he sorted out their issues, and they fucked him. Everyone listening is incredulous, but he swears by it. That's their culture. They do anything to please their man. This episode can reflect on Nick's sexuality. All the guys buy into or talk about what they would do, so everyone's believing the Dre and his fake stories. They talk about the sex. They talk the sex talk of the battlefield. You know, guys with little experience out in battlefield are all like hypersexual, and the less experience you have, the more sexual you are. Whereas the more experience you have, the less you have to project, and the more you can just rely on your memories, and the more you realize that it's not how you thought it is. All the guys, just like people who haven't been in fights, are the ones who can get most angsty in fight situations because they don't know what to expect, and so now they're not calm. Whereas people who've been in situations like it before are calm because they know when there's actual danger, they know when to pop off, and when it's time to just kind of like wait and see. They talk the sex talk of the battlefield, girls at home and past conquests. Nick does not perform well. He doesn't have stories to share. He's the odd man out in that type of situation. He does talk a little about his past. This can be a device for sketching his past. The more you can paint character past through dialogue or natural story, the better, the smoother. That's just like writing technique. CPA saw themselves as monitors of info rather than providers of info. Evidence that they are saboteurs. Newspaper story in LA Times by Carol Williams. Look up. The Iraqis upset about trash crew in Baghdad employed small children, younger than legal age for work, 15, and shaken down by their bosses for a third of their wages, $3 a day. Her reporting led to excommunication from info sources. So already early in the occupation, we're seeing that they're controlling the narrative, and anything negative about the narrative, they're getting rid of. We would have, this is the our Vietnam, and it's even less reported on honestly and factually than Vietnam. So for all of our technological innovation and whatnot, until WikiLeaks came out, we were at a loss for connecting the real narratives and actually piecing together a historic record. And that's why Julian Assange is still in house arrest. We would have been better off if the CPA hadn't shown up. That was the point. That was the point, yeah. The CPA showed up to keep you not better off. General who served in Iraq. This is a general. The CPA was the single greatest asset the enemy had. So up till this point, these have been my opinions. If you don't like my opinions, let's find this general and find his opinions. He has the credibility and the first-hand experience to back up what I'm saying. I'm just talking out my ass from a book I read. In Al Anbar province, local police could not get flak vests, communication equipment, vehicles. George Bush, I just got an email recently from the Iraqi Veterans Against the War, who rebranded, now they're another group. But I pay attention to these groups, and I think they're doing really, really good work. Anyone who's out there trying to organize for accountability about this war, who hasn't given up, who's actually providing real veteran support. Because you don't think the veterans need for their healing process. They need accountability, and they need to support the truth. They need other people to support the truth with them. George Bush is being honored for his support for the veterans when they sent them over there and they weren't even giving them enough equipment to do the mission that they were given. They lied them into war, and then they didn't provide the resources to actually execute on those lies. Plot for Monday. As this Monday, like I had really crazy writing ambitions. Like I'm going to write half the book Monday, half the book Tuesday. CPA thought center of gravity was the U.S. public. The military thought it was Iraq, and that's how the CPA acted. It acted about, and that's also how Obama acts. You see, it's not a Republican-Democrat issue. They act around the interests of them obtaining and keeping power for themselves and their own personal goals and objectives. And they're power brokers. They're broking for corporate interests who put them in power, and then they try to keep those positions. But they tell the military, well, the center of gravity is Iraq. But if you look at their actions, you see that they're really just caring more about public opinion back home. Two different missions. The fooling of the U.S. public because they are fleecing us of money, while the Army wants to help the people. A way to relate to this is Mom's Pops. He cares more about smoothing over troubles and covering up problems and fixing them. So now I'm relating it to, at the time, my parents reconciled, my dad for his credit, and that's why our family always comes back together, is like that, what is that quote? America does the right thing when it exhausts all other options. My dad acted the fool a little bit, but he came around and they did their thing. They had a little separation. And then, you know what they did? They filed for a divorce. and then the paperwork didn't go through. And so they went to get married again, thinking they had to go through it all again. For some reason, the paperwork didn't go through, so they considered it a sign. And now, as you get older, you get less energy and you can't argue as much. A way to relate to this to Mom and Pops, he cared more about smoothing over troubles and covering up problems and fixing them. Maybe that's why I didn't read these notes either, is I didn't remember any of this personal stuff. I thought it was just Iraq notes, and that's what I'm realizing about your brain, is some stuff that is really compact emotion, which might be related to trauma, which even if you're an adult and you don't think it's that big of a deal, your parents breaking up is still traumatic, your brain just ignores. It's like, that's where you have to have respect for your subconscious. Is I've had that a couple times during this year where I'm reviewing things in my life and I either misremembered something or I didn't even remember an exchange. And the exchange was significant and big over the course of like a month with multiple emails with this one girl. And I was a dick to her, and I couldn't defend those words now from how I feel now and what type of man I'm trying to be. I was just needlessly short and just a little bit cruel, and I think that's why I didn't remember it, because it didn't fit into my narrative of who I am. And so I didn't remember all this personal stuff about my family in here. I don't know if I would have put it online if I did. Which is good. Radical transparency. Cares about smoothing over troubles and covering up problems than fixing them. Maybe he's not capable of fixing them. He does want to rock the... He does not want to rock the boat, is what I meant. Get his cash and likes the current status quo. Show his actions like the CPA. If you just have him as an example, talk about the behavior pattern. You might not need CPA story except a brief sex one. He is the CPA. The Iraq problem is Robert embezzling. Francis is the military. My parents had a co-worker who stole money from their business. Francis made all of the mistakes that the military does. The idealistic lieutenant, have that be Fran's thoughts, words on the situation. They have known about this for a while. It just comes up Monday because Fran loses file. Francis tries to talk to Pops like military tries and discounts lack of results as incompetence rather than purposeful. Pops doesn't want to resolve embezzlement because that would cut off his cash flow. And also there's a perceived need while he is there. Moms might leave him otherwise. Agency is Iraq. Also US, the prize, the natural resource. Bob knows the nature of man. You see, he understands psychology when he is closing, showing off for Fran. He knows that Pops will go along for the ride. People don't change without motivation. It takes a strong character to be principled. Have the speech at the end be Fran seeing Pops for his actions, not words. Finding out that Robert's embezzling. That's what he finds out Monday. Moms pulls Fran's aside, says she found out he's embezzling again. She found his suitcase open when they were driving to dinner or something, and she looked through it, found the statements from the bank for accounts that they had been closed. He keeps the suitcase with him at all times, but this instance she was able to sneak out some papers, copies of the checks made out to the agency with fake policy numbers and fake policies. They had 10 to 12 fake work comp policies when she discovered them. She was ready to turn him in, but he cried. They've known him since he was young, and she saw him as a friend. In her words, show what held her back was her humanity. She did not lose faith in his ability to change, the premise of the book around faith. So she put herself at risk to let him make amends. The plan was to close accounts and settle all the claims, then replace all the policies with good ones. Yes, she used the money, and she shouldn't have, but most of it has gone to claims. The proof is the fact that her bills are mounting. She's losing her house, medical things she's ignoring at her own body, the generic prescription for Fran, but now she finds proof that he's back at it, unraveling all the work they've been doing. This ties into the speech Fran gave him at the end. In order to really change, you have to hold people accountable. Pops gets reported, and Bob too. Sunlight is the best antiseptic. This is interesting. I forgot I put all this in here. So Fran, I guess this is because I had Nick's story in Iraq, And then I have Fran, which is a completely different story here at home, and I guess I was trying to tie the two. So this is like, this happens a lot with these creative projects, is you have something that you're working on, and instead of finishing that project, now you have a tangent, and then you try to, if it doesn't fit into this project, now you have two parallel lines running. And I have something going on in Iraq with Nick and what's going to happen with him, and I guess I was trying to write also something about the agency, which tells me that at the time I was working in my parents' insurance agency again. I'm not even sure how I'm going to deal with that now, but I've always kind of felt like I have to address it. This guy embezzling money, I'm setting up fake insurance policies, and that's just going to be what it is. So I'm not really sure how we're going to round that out, but I suppose it's going to see the light of day eventually. And so this must be when I heard that my mom discovered that this guy did it again. He embezzled money, took some insurance premiums for accounts that didn't exist, and committed insurance fraud. And then my mom, instead of turning him in, she knows the family since they were young, and she's very loyal. She just tried to let him make good and close it out. He hired lawyers and this and that, and he was just trying to basically like just unwind everything. And then, so I remember this happening. And so when I would go and live and work some and then come back and work in their agency, I'd get more and more pieces of the story, and then I'd go and live some more and work some more, or like do these things, go to Santa Cruz, do this and that. Like there's a reason why I didn't just stay to work with my parents in their insurance agency, other than just me not wanting to do the family business. And that was part of because I would hear about this dirtiness, and I'm like, oh, I'm not sure how that's going to be resolved. And I would just check in every now and then. And I think one time I put this guy on notice. I told him, you better do right by my folks. You better not. I was just like, this is eventually going to see the light of day, and I'm not going to play this bullshit. So don't screw over my folks. He's 15 years older than me and 15 years younger than my folks. So he actually sits right in between me and them. And my parents had me when they're 28 and 30. So my mom thought that they were closing it out, and he was making good on his promise to her that she's like, I'm not going to go to the cops with this. I'm going to just let you handle it, but handle it. Like, dissolve these contracts, get these guys placed with actual insurance companies, and this is my understanding of it from this note and from what I remember. I don't want to say things that there's people who've investigated this since then. I think they've gone to court and they've closed out most of this stuff. So there's like legal documents on this now and stuff, and I think they closed that company and some other stuff. I'm still catching up. I come back into their life and I'm like, all right, so what's going on? And I try to check their liabilities, and so do we still have like hanging things from the past business which was done improperly. But this reminds me that they gave him a chance, and he went and embezzled another time and stole even more money. And that's where this is important, because this is why I care so much about Iraq and the injustice, and why I care so much about corruption in general. Because if I was ever tempted to, and when I went to Occupy Wall Street, where I told them, let's audit the accounts and let's start a nonprofit the right way. Because I've seen firsthand in my family what happens when you do business the wrong way. And as much money that came in, my folks lost their house in the recession, so we didn't see any of the money. Or if we did see anything, we saw a small fraction. It's the guy who was embezzling who took it all. I don't really trust that he ever got clean. But that's my own personal opinion. But I know that he was investigated by some of these companies later on. They had to go to court, they had to pay a lot of money. For his sake, I hope that he's cleaned everything up. Because now I'm starting to become more of a public person. We're going to be speaking on it. But back then he had it, and now I'm tying those. My thoughts and my opinions didn't come from school, didn't come from ethics books. They came from looking at people and how they act in my life. So I'm digging into my dad right here, because he's being kind of like a little bit pervy on his online stuff. Not to say that looking at porn online is pervy, but if you're gonna, just be honest in your relationship. That was my big thing. I wasn't even like trying to judge him about what he was looking at online. It was more like just have an open, honest relationship with my mother. If you're going to do your stuff, then try to expand your relationship to include her in that. And that's how I've acted in my relationships too. Put my sexuality into my partner. If not, then don't have that relationship. It's not an honest relationship. If you want to, have a relationship, but like online should do that. But like, just try to be open and honest and sincere in your communications with other people seems to be a good rule of thumb. Unless you get off with secrecy, and then like that's not for me to judge, I guess. Sexuality is weird. Business is weird. War is weird. There's lessons to be learned from all of this. We have to speed up. We're already 35 minutes. No, Gina, Fran does that job. Maybe a customer service story Monday. AO, area of operation. Soldiers blame the civilians for not rebuilding the country quick enough to pacify the country, while civilians blame the military for not providing enough security to enable the rebuilding. May 2004, Center for Army Lessons Learned. A roadmap for the rebuilding of Iraq does not exist. There is not a plan for that outlines short, medium, and long-term objectives. This, of course, is because they are not concerned with rebuilding Iraq. Same with the office. There is no short, medium, long-term plan for cleaning up the office. So I'm relating, that's really interesting. I'm watching the dissolution of Iraq, the invasion. I watch it on the news and I read about it, and then when I get these books and I get to actually research it, so now not just news articles, but like people who are out there fact-checking, researching, and then later on with WikiLeaks when they're leaking documents, I'm watching them do that corruption over there, and then I'm watching this guy do corruption within my parents' office, and I'm probably relating Robert, that guy who embezzled, with J. Paul Bremer, and recognizing that they're the same personalities. And then he's really conservative Republican voting for these guys. So I'm recognizing the characteristic, the same as like when you look at Trump and look at his cronyism and his corruption, and then as a real estate agent in New York, I see what the real estate industry, their opinion of him, which is pretty much the same thing. He's a two-bit hustler, and no one really trusts him with business. Most of his money comes from Browning nowadays, and most of the properties that he manages in New York lose money and are run into the ground. So, yeah, it's interesting. Character is character. Character is the underlying thread through all of this. Whether at the large scale of our society, the leaders of our society, or the small scale who work within our small businesses, character is the connecting pattern. May 2004, Center for Army Lessons Learned. Roadmap for rebuilding of Iraq does not blah, 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 blah. Oh, so the Center for Army Lessons Learned. See, so the military has a self-corrective measure, because it would be suicidal for us to have a military that wasn't self-aware. And so the military, and that's when I feel like we have to go into the country and do an audit of like the Fed, or do an audit of the war in Iraq. It's like the military does do that. They hide these things away from the public scrutiny, or it's not talked about. But if they didn't know what these failures were, and we were actually like failing repeatedly, then we would be having a less and less efficient armed forces, which would make us less safe. So back in May 2004, the Center for Army Lessons Learned states that the roadmap, so this is the Army itself, the roadmap for the rebuilding of Iraq does not exist. There's not a plan that outlines the short, medium, long-term objectives. So within a year of us invading Iraq, they held up a mirror to the military and the CPA, which is why you need bureaucratic fixers in order to lead the military so far astray. It's too easy to just take the money. On Bremer's desk is a sign: success has 1,000 fathers. Wolfowitz, Iraq reconstruction will be largely self-financing. Wow, that's interesting. Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel in Baghdad. What you see here is an unconventional war fought conventionally. Tactics that U.S. uses subverting U.S. strategy. So again, the military they don't have the convenience of tolerating bullshit like bureaucrats do, because their life and death is on the line. 4 major thrusts of enemy attack: Iraqi security forces, politicians, direct attack against U.S., attacks against foreign forces to isolate U.S. occupation. August 19th, 2003, cement truck laden with artillery shells and other explosives crashed into the outer wall of HQ of UN in Iraq, on Canal Road in eastern Baghdad. The blast was so powerful that the windows in camp of 2nd Armored Cav Regiment, a half a mile away, were blown in, destroyed the corner of the 3-story building, killing 22 people. A Brazilian diplomat, chief of the UN mission, survived the blast but died trapped in the rubble. That was Sergio, that was Samantha Powers wrote a book about that guy. Look up the blast. Was this U.S. complicit? UN cuts the staff from 800 to 15 in Iraq. Other international orgs pulling out in the following week. It was a brilliant campaign to isolate the U.S. A cement truck laden with artillery shells and other explosives crashed into the outer walls of the headquarters of the UN in Iraq, and that was the turning point. The UN went from 800 to 15 personnel. And also that guy, I have to look him up. He was said to have been one of the few people who could have actually strategized away an exit strategy for Iraq, because he had so much first-hand experience in conflict, international conflict, spoke like 6 languages, was like these statesmen of our generation. Small minority of Al Anbar residents take up arms. I think what Sergio Milan is his name. Small minority of Al Anbar residents take up arms, but large middle group does nothing to stop them. There are hordes of angry young men and too many weapons available. So the majority of the Iraqis aren't against us, but they're not stopping the minority who are against us at this point. This is 2003. This is the very beginning still. The conceit of Robert and U.S. foreign policies, and I think there's some anger against this guy who took money from my parents' company and put them in this precarious legal position. So now I'm relating him to my political views, excising my frustration probably. The conceit of Robert and the U.S. foreign policy is that they have learned that you don't have to be right to get what you want. Let other people be right. Let them feel important. Your greed is a mistake, not avarice. Eventually you'll get it right. Like the reporter who doesn't get that the U.S. is criminally negligent, purposefully negligent, predatory. Moms gives excuses for Robert and then is surprised when he does it again. The character is action, not words. Fran learns this from D too. That fantasy relationship he has in his mind never existed. Character is action, not words, encompasses losing faith and don't live in your mind. So this is complicated. I'm relating a guy who did shady business dealings with my parents to the shady war in Iraq, to the reporters who aren't honest about the U.S. and the shady war in Iraq, to my mom who's not honest with herself about just how bad Robert is character-wise, and that he'll just keep repeating these same patterns and she shouldn't cover for him or make excuses for him, to my friend who I write down as D, who is addicted to drugs, and my romance with her, which is never consummated, and so I'm going after her, but I'm like, it's shouldn't I, maybe I'm just fooling myself. So this is a lot of stuff going on in my head when I'm like 25, 26, about how to be a moral person and how to deal with other people who aren't being moral. And this is all tied with like my identity as an American and American policy, my identity within my family and a family business, and this guy is going against my family. Then my identity as a man, looking for a female partner, and this girl who I feel isn't doing right by herself or by me. Because I'm still trying. I think I did a lot of, just that puppy love, trying to do a lot of things for someone, try to win over their love by just constantly being there and supporting them. Really what you're doing is you're just enabling their addiction. SNAFU, SNAFU, situation normal, all fucked up. IED, improvised explosive device, 155 millimeter artillery shell, and a variety of mortar rounds, occasionally TNT or plastic explosives, set off using cellular phones, car alarms, transmitters, toy car controller, under rocks or piles of trash, carcasses of dead dogs. In the summer heat, the soldiers don't want to check them because of the smell. So they put IEDs in the carcasses of dead dogs. Tactics was to block road with a truck or bus that appears to have been stalled or broken down. Plant bombs behind the vehicle in the road, where a U.S. convoy would then be forced to stop. U.S. troops responded by driving up on the sidewalk or into oncoming lanes of traffic. My cousin was a driver too, so he was, that might have been stuff that he had to do. But basically you learn not to stop. Take the electronic guts out of a toy car, wrap them in C4 plastic explosives with a blasting cap, detonate by remote control. One lieutenant colonel mounted a remote control on his dash and taped down the lever, detonating all toy car bombs 100 yards before he got there. It's a poor man's anti-explosive device. They were doing this. They were improvising, but a lot of it was also because they weren't properly equipped. A lot of these vehicles weren't armored. Apparently an armored vehicle can take the blast a lot better than a non-armored vehicle. Senior Central Command, anyone who comes out in the middle of the night to plant an IED dies. So Senior Central Command was saying that anyone who comes out in the middle of the night to plant an IED is, you're free to kill them. Have one of these snipers spying on a popular traffic circle. Oh, so I'm talking about a possible character. One of the snipers who's checking out a popular traffic circle. His job is to pick off the would-be bombers. That's a tough job. Are these guys would-be bombers, or are these guys just breaking curfew? After they take Nick on patrol without a firing pin, the guys harass him further. They get drunk and something is up. The commander, who didn't like the lieutenant, and now picks on Nick in his absence, tells, because the commander and then the NCO were going to be the ones who are more cynical. Let's just get our troops back alive. And then the lieutenant was going to be idealistic, so he was kind of like being the check on them. So without the lieutenant gone, now it's just pure savagery and then against Nick's innocence. Tells Nick that if he didn't have his firing pin in the morning, he's going to be court-martialed. So he blames him for the incident. And he said he's going to send him to Leavenworth for some army crime, endangering a fellow soldier or some BS. Other troops tell him that the pin is buried at the corner where a couple IEDs have been planted in the past. He is forced to go out there naked and dig it out. So that's interesting. I was going to create a situation where not only did he get sent in on a mission without a working weapon, which caused all sorts of trauma in a firefight where he can't shoot back. Then, when you think that he's going to be saved by his command basically says, I'm going to send you, they say Fort Leavenworth is where, like, your military prison. So the joke when you're in the military is like, you're going to be sent to Fort Leavenworth. It's like saying you're going to be sent to Alcatraz. So they're going to send him, so the command says, if you don't have your pin, we're going to send you to jail, basically. And then he goes back to his troops. So now, this is another thing. I'd have to walk this through with soldiers and see how reasonable all this can actually fit into a narrative, because this is from me not having served in these situations. Second-hand account is you have to run past someone who's actually there. So he was going to have to go out there after curfew naked and dig out his firing pin and basically tempt other people, snipers, who say that anyone who is out past curfew, and it looks like if you're digging something out from the ground out past curfew, it would look like he was planting an IED. So that was going to be his final challenge. That was going to probably be the climax of his emotional arc. He doesn't have the heart to go, and so the sniper, now we're looking through the sniper perspective. He doesn't have the heart to go for a headshot, so he shoots him in the thigh. So the sniper actually thinks he's planting an IED. He probably sees he's naked, and that's probably like the dramatic tension is like, is he an insurgent, is he not? It's really weird that he's naked and this other stuff, but we can't take any chances. And but instead of killing him, he shoots him in the leg, and that's what gets Nick out of the combat zone. Nick is thinking the whole time, the U.S. soldiers are savages, they are animals. The arguments between Iraqi and him on the walls were over the subject. Nick and Lieutenant defending human nature and people are basically good, while the wall girl was saying that they were animals and only would listen to violence. Hears him cry out, Allahu Akbar. Nick finally loses his faith. And Soldier calls it in. And that he just took down a potential insurgent and they should probably take this guy in for interrogation. So that's what saves him. I guess it was going to be that Nick's mind breaks. He calls out Allahu Akbar instead of calls out to his Christian God. So he gives up on his own faith. That whole thing about the wall, I don't know if I sketched that out because this really is supposed to be about the notes from the books I read. But apparently I'm putting personal journal stuff about my family and them breaking up, and then stuff about Robert and embezzling money from the insurance agency. So I have other documents. I don't know if that's probably on old hard drives that I saved where I actually sketched out other parts of the story. But the lieutenant and Nick were going to go into the school, and it was going to be an area where they can interface with a Iraqi. And it was going to be a child, it was going to be a girl that eventually they meet and they start feeding. But the beginning of that interaction was going to be her writing on the wall and them noticing that the wall, they go in there to clear it or something, or there's some dead bodies or something, but then they notice writing on the wall, and then they write on the wall, and then they come back and they notice the writing on the wall. So it goes back and forth a little bit of communication until they actually discover who it is and find out it's a child, and they start comforting her, but they don't know if she has a family or this and that, and they know they can't bring her back to the green zone or wherever they're stationed. So, but it's going to be a part of the story, and that's how you can include native Iraqis' narrative into my narrative from the soldier's perspective. So you can round out all the different perspectives of the stakeholders in the story. You have to, if you're staging something in Iraq about the invasion, we have to get the Iraqis' perspective. And also it's a nice foil to have the child and the innocence, but she was going to be the most cynical. So, what was it? The arguments between the Iraqi and him on the wall over the subject. Yeah, they were defending human nature, but the wall girl, she had seen too much. And then I had plenty of stories about the atrocities in Iraq, witnessed or that the local population had been subjected to. That I could just draw one of those stories and put it in this little girl's eyes, and then he gets shot, and it looks like he's planning an IED apparently. And the only reason his life is saved because he's naked, he looks crazy, and they think he's a terrorist. They bring him in for interrogation and find out he's a soldier, and that's how he gets home, I guess. The insurgents developed new tactics. Troops were being trained to stop 200 yards before bombs. Troops were being trained to stop 200 yards from bombs. Iraqis adapted by planting one bomb in a visible location, then hiding several more 200 meters up where the troops would stop. Typical IED cell, 6 to 8 people, led by a planner financier, next bomb maker, next the placer, pretending to fix the car he plants bombs, or drops it through a hole cut in the car. And next is the trigger man. I had this book called Unembedded, Photojournalism is in Iraq, and the guy took a picture of an IED team, and you see 5 or 6 guys standing around at night while one of them is laying down asphalt, and they just planted an IED and they're putting asphalt over it. I don't know how that guy got that photo, and I don't know if that guy, after getting that photo, reported it to the U.S. authorities. You would like to think that he did, because you'd like to think that this book wasn't published by people who were killing U.S. soldiers, but just by being there with that group and taking that photo, all of them could have been dead, because the orders were, that's why the curfew was out there. And definitely people opening up the street and closing it back up, those guys, that was a shoot on sight type situation. And these are things you don't see in the news, but you can buy these books on Amazon. I had them. Then a spotter or two who provide security for the rest of the team. So, this is the ID group. Sometimes a cameraman for learning and for recruiting and propaganda. Army began to jam frequencies of the electronic devices. I got 5 more minutes in this hour block, and I need to do this fast. We're going to do this today. This is today's work to get through this, but it's dense. It's informationally dense and emotionally dense, and more so, I didn't realize it's so personal. The Army began to, for every military tactic, there is a countermeasure. Military operations are one giant version of rock, paper, scissors. IEDs, yeah, that's why you can't fight emotionally. You can't just be like, good guy, bad guy, we're just going to kick their ass. That's not how you play a chess game. And I've developed my chess game as I learned how to slow down and have situational awareness for beginning, middle, end game, and what position I'm in, and what my objectives should be for that position. And as I develop more patience, I scale back my objectives and just try to win the position as opposed to win the whole game within that one position. And that I think that's strategy in general. IEDs in overhanging branches and leaves. Hanging them from light poles moves the bomb blast above the armored doors. Telltale signs of vehicle-borne IED. A jalopy so overladen it sits low on its springs. Fresh tires on an old car. A one-way trip. The driver wants no flats. Have a soldier who manned a checkpoint talking about the things he looks for. He describes an incident at a checkpoint where he fired on a similar car to the one above. Riding low on the springs, fresh tires, but the whole car is beat up. Combat lifesaver. Specialist trained as a part-time medic. Is this Nick? Need to get a list of experiences he had in Iraq. I never talked to him about it. When I eventually talked to him, when I got a chance to have one-on-ones, it's just more about being there for a family member. We definitely don't talk about any of his experiences over there. Full-time medics have more poise and knowledge. Correct him. He rides with a lieutenant since he's a medic, valuable to the unit. Taking off a soldier's helmet and taking with it a part of his head, seeing someone's brain. Gurgling in air and blood, exhaling blood. I got these details from the books probably. Have a smart-ass soldier describe an IED explosion to newbies. Imagine shredding flesh like tissue paper, shards of metal going everywhere. If you don't get the full blast, you get the percussion rattling your brain inside your skull. Bradley fighting vehicles turned into a furnace, burning flesh. A person inhales and suffers inhalation injury. The fact that IEDs were repeatedly being placed in the same location showed that the locals weren't stopping them. This is how much harder these types of wars become when you don't have the populace on your side. The leader of SCIRI, the Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, Ayatollah Mohammed Bakr Hakim, one of the most important political figures in Iraq, the most important religious figure to support the occupation. Car bomb killed him soon after Friday prayers in the holy city of Najaf also killed 90 people. He made it into one of my poems. I reference him. I said he had come back home to the city of Najaf. They said he was a future. I'll read those poems later. But all these little details later on again, this story didn't take off. There's a lot of stuff probably because it was too emotionally dense. I was trying to express my feelings about family, love, and country. And I think maybe pick one or maybe now. It's tough because looking back on romance, you can be objective, I think, once you've experienced really deep romance. At this time, I hadn't even had a real serious relationship, so it's hard for me to contextualize that. And then also, me and my folks, we have a little bit of distance from most of that bullshit, so we can contextualize that. My folks went through their cycle of breakup reconciliation. And I learned also to give them space and respect their boundaries more. And that's work in progress. I have a lifelong issue with boundaries. And the politics, I'm trying to learn how I can express that more in a healthy way where I can engage with politics. But back then, this was a lot to put on my young 25, 26-year-old plate. But some of these ideas, the little nuggets I took out. So I took that guy out who died in Najaf, and he went into a poem. And it was a really good poem. The concept that success in counterinsurgency consists of separating the insurgents from the popular support never took hold. You know what? I'm going to have to. We're going to stop this. On to the next hour. We are on page 13 of 41.